What Ghost couldn't know was that her rescue of Master Chief Volkov had been observed by more than just American intelligence assets. Enemy signals intelligence operators had also been monitoring the frequencies, plotting aircraft movements, and drawing conclusions about American capabilities and intentions in the region. The debriefing lasted 3 hours and covered every aspect of the morning's mission in excruciating detail. Major Harrison from the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing's intelligence section asked that the radio crackled with static over the Hindu Kush Mountains, carrying a voice that would haunt command for years. Broken arrow, broken arrow. This is Vanguard 27. I have eyes on friendly, requesting immediate CAS. The transmission cut through the pre-dawn darkness like a blade through silk, but what followed next defied everything the brass thought they knew about courage. Master Chief Petty Officer Kazimir Volkov pressed his bleeding shoulder against the rocky outcrop, his scar-H running dangerously low on ammunition. The Taliban fighters had him pinned in a valley that wasn't supposed to exist on any map. His team extraction had gone sideways 12 hours ago when their Chinook took an RPG to the tail rotor, scattering his squad across hostile terrain like seeds in a hurricane. Now, as the eastern horizon began to blush with morning light, Kaz realized he might be watching his last sunrise. The enemy had patience. They could smell his blood, hear his labored breathing echoing off the canyon walls. Voices drifted down from the ridgeline in Pashto and Arabic, coordinating their next move. Kaz counted at least 30 hostiles, maybe more. His radio had taken shrapnel, leaving him with only a backup emergency beacon that might or might not reach friendly ears. The irony wasn't lost on him. A decorated Navy SEAL, veteran of 4 deployments, might die alone in a valley that military intelligence swore was empty. That's when the sky began to whisper. Most people never hear an A-10 Thunderbolt II before they see it. The aircraft was designed for low-altitude operations, its twin turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage to avoid ground debris. But Kaz had worked with close air support before. He recognized the distinctive whine of those General Electric engines long before the aircraft appeared as a dark speck against the orange dawn. Unknown aircraft, this is ground element requesting immediate assistance. I am 1 click north of checkpoint Bravo, taking effective enemy fire from elevated positions. Kaz whispered into his backup radio, not daring to hope. The response came in a voice that cut through his despair like sunlight through storm clouds. Female, calm, professional. Ground element, this is Reaper 11. I have your beacon. Danger close approved. Stay low and mark your position with IR strobe. Something in that voice made Kaz believe he might actually see another sunset. The pilot sounded like she'd done this before, like she'd pulled warriors out of impossible situations and sent them home to their families. As he fumbled for his infrared marker, Kaz didn't know he was listening to Captain Evelyn Ghost, Kozlov, a pilot whose legend was about to be written in smoke and thunder across the Afghan sky. The enemy fighters on the ridgeline had no idea death was circling 3,000 feet above them, patient as winter and twice as cold. Captain Evelyn Kozlov had been flying combat missions for 8 years, but her hands still moved with the precision of a surgeon as she adjusted her altitude and began her attack run. The A-10's cockpit wrapped around her like a titanium cocoon, every switch and display as familiar as her own heartbeat. Through her helmet-mounted display, the infrared signature of the stranded SEAL pulsed like a beacon of hope against the cold mountain terrain. Reaper 11, I have multiple heat signatures on the ridgeline, came the voice from below, strained but steady. Estimate 30 enemy personnel with small arms and RPGs. How copy? Solid copy, ground element. I count 32 hostiles in 3 distinct groups. First group bearing 090 from your position, second group 270, third group 045. Can you confirm target priority? Ghost banked her aircraft into a lazy circle. using the early morning thermals to conserve fuel while she studied the tactical situation. The enemy had made a classic mistake. They'd positioned themselves on the high ground but failed to establish proper overwatch. They were focused entirely on the lone operator trapped below, unaware that deliverance was about to rain down from above in the form of 30mm depleted uranium rounds. Reaper, priority target is Group 2 at bearing 270. They have the angle on my position and what looks like crew-served weapons. Ghost's targeting computer painted the hostile positions in amber on her heads-up display. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon beneath her aircraft contained 1,150 rounds of armor-piercing depth, each round weighing nearly a pound. She'd used this weapon system to destroy tanks, bunkers, and armored personnel carriers. Against infantry in the open, it would be devastatingly effective. Understand priority target Group 2. Danger close fire mission approved. Recommend you get as low as possible and stay there. 30 seconds to impact. The morning sun caught the leading edge of Ghost's wings as she rolled into her attack dive, the A-10's distinctive silhouette casting a shadow across the valley floor. At 2,000 feet, she could see individual fighters moving along the ridgeline, their weapons glinting in the golden light. They had no idea that their morning hunt was about to become their final moment on Earth. The Avenger cannon spun up with a sound like mechanical thunder, and Ghost squeezed the trigger with the calm precision that had earned her the call sign that would haunt enemy fighters from Helmand to Kandahar. The sound reached the valley floor 3 seconds after the muzzle flash lit up the morning sky. It wasn't the sharp crack of small arms fire or the deep boom of artillery. This was different, a grinding, tearing sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the mountains were being split apart by invisible giants. Kaz pressed himself deeper into the rocks as dirt and debris rained down around him, the concussion from the cannon fire making his ears ring despite his protective gear. Above, Ghost maintained her dive angle with mechanical precision, walking her fire across the ridgeline in controlled bursts. Each squeeze of the trigger sent 42 rounds downrange in a single second, the depleted uranium projectiles moving at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The effect on the enemy position was immediate and catastrophic. "Holy shit," Kaz whispered into his radio, watching chunks of rock and equipment fly through the air where the Taliban fighters had been positioned moments before. "Reaper, that was danger close and right on target. Group 2 is neutralized. Say again, Group 2 is gone." "Copy ground element. Rolling in on Group 1 bearing 090. Keep your head down." Ghost pulled out of her dive at 800 feet, the A-10's turbofan engine screaming as she applied full power and banked hard to the left. The aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that could survive direct hits from 23 cannon rounds, protected her from the small arms fire now erupting from the remaining enemy positions. Tracer rounds streaked past her canopy like angry fireflies, but she'd flown through worse. The second group of fighters had made the fatal mistake of revealing their positions by shooting at her aircraft. Ghost could see muzzle flashes winking along the eastern ridgeline, and her targeting computer automatically calculated firing solutions for each source of hostile fire. She'd been trained to fly this mission profile at Nellis Air Force Base, practicing close air support runs until they became as natural as breathing. Ground element, I have multiple sources of effective fire from Group 1. Can you give me a talk-on to their exact position? Reaper, Group 1, is approximately 200 meters east of the destroyed position. I can see at least 12 individuals with AKs and what looks like a PKM machine gun. They're in a natural fighting position behind a rock formation that looks like a broken tooth. Ghost spotted the formation immediately, a jagged spire of granite that provided excellent cover from ground assault, but left the fighters completely exposed to air attack from above. She rolled into her second attack run, the morning light glinting off her aircraft's distinctive nose art. A stylized Reaper carrying a smoking rifle, with 27 small bombs painted beneath it representing confirmed kills. "Guns, guns, guns," Ghost transmitted over the radio, the traditional call indicating she was firing her cannon. The GAU-8 erupted again, sending a stream of 30mm death into the rock formation. The depleted uranium round struck granite with such force that the stone itself became a weapon, fragmenting into lethal shrapnel that scythed through the enemy position like invisible blades. From his position in the valley, Kaz watched the eastern ridgeline disappear in a cloud of pulverized rock and smoke. The PKM machine gun that had been tracking his position moments before fell silent. Its crew, reduced to shadows, burned into the mountainside. The surviving fighters in Group 1 broke cover and ran, exposing themselves as they fled across the open ground toward the third group's position. "Reaper, Group 1 is broken and running. I count approximately 6 personnel moving toward Group 3's position, bearing 045 from my location." "Roger that, I have eyes on the runners. Group 3 just made a tactical error by staying in place." Ghost pulled out of her attack run and climbed back to 3,000 feet, using the altitude to assess the remaining threat. The third group of enemy fighters had been smart enough to take cover when the shooting started, but they'd also painted themselves into a tactical corner. They were positioned on a narrow ledge with limited escape routes, probably thinking they could wait for the aircraft to run low on ammunition and fuel. They didn't understand they were fighting Ghost Kozlov. The pilot's reputation in the close air support community was built on more than just marksmanship. She had an intuitive understanding of battlefield psychology, an ability to read the enemy's intentions and exploit their mistakes. The Taliban fighters below had revealed their positions by maneuvering, and now she could see the complete tactical picture spread out beneath her like a three-dimensional chessboard. "Ground element, I need you to move approximately 50 meters west to the large boulder cluster. Can you do that without exposing yourself to effective fire?" Kaz studied the terrain around his position. The boulder cluster would provide better cover and put him further from the remaining enemy positions, but it would require crossing 20 meters of open ground. "Reaper, I'll be exposed for approximately 15 seconds during the movement." "Copy that. I'll provide suppression fire during your movement. On my mark, move fast and stay low. Mark. Execute." Ghost rolled into a shallow dive, not to engage the enemy directly, but to draw their attention skyward. The psychological effect was immediate. As soon as the A-10's distinctive silhouette appeared in their sights, the remaining fighters opened fire on the aircraft instead of watching the ground. Kaz sprinted across the open terrain like his life depended on it, because it did. His combat boots found purchase on the loose shale as he bounded from cover to cover, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest with each stride. Above him, Ghost's aircraft absorbed the incoming fire without apparent damage, the titanium armor plating designed specifically for this type of low-altitude combat. By the time the enemy fighters realized they should be watching the ground instead of the sky, the SEAL had reached the safety of the boulder cluster. "Reaper, I'm in position. Thanks for the cover." "Anytime, ground element. Now let's finish this." Ghost had been studying the remaining enemy position while providing cover for Kaz's movement. The 8 fighters in Group 3 were trapped on a ledge with only one escape route, a narrow goat path that wound down the backside of the ridge. She could see their leader gesturing animatedly, probably trying to decide whether to surrender, fight, or flee. The decision was made for them when Ghost noticed something that changed the entire tactical situation. One of the fighters was carrying a man-portable air defense system, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile that could turn her heavily armored aircraft into burning wreckage in seconds. "Ground element, I have positive identification of a MAN-PADS in Group 3. This is about to get interesting." The calm professionalism in Ghost's voice never wavered, but Kaz could hear the subtle shift in tone. Flying close air support was dangerous enough when facing small arms and RPGs, but surface-to-air missiles were an entirely different threat category. Most pilots would have pulled back to a safer altitude and called for backup. Ghost was not most pilots. "Reaper, what's your plan?" "I'm going to kill him before he can lock onto my aircraft. Simple." What Ghost didn't mention was that engaging a MANPADS operator required flying directly at the threat, presenting the largest possible target signature, while trying to eliminate the missile system before it could be fired. It was a tactical situation that had killed dozens of pilots in Iraq and Afghanistan, a high-stakes game of aerial chicken, where the stakes were measured in tons of burning aluminum and human life. She rolled into the steepest dive of the morning, pushing the A-10 toward its structural limits as she lined up on the enemy position. Through her targeting display, she could see the missile operator raising his weapon, the distinctive profile of a Soviet-era SA-7 clearly visible against the morning sky. The missile's infrared seeker was probably already tracking her engine's heat signature. Time compressed into crystalline moments. Ghost's targeting computer calculated the precise firing solution while her hands made minute adjustments to the aircraft's attitude. The GAU-8 cannon was already spun up and ready to fire, but at this range and angle, she would have exactly one opportunity to neutralize the threat before the missile reached her aircraft. The SA-7 operator was good. Ghost could see him tracking her dive, leading the target the way he'd been trained. In approximately 3 seconds, he would achieve missile lock and fire. The SA-7's warhead contained enough high explosive to cripple her aircraft, and at this altitude, there would be no time to eject. Ghost squeezed the trigger. The Avenger cannon fired a 2-second burst, 84 rounds of depleted uranium that covered the distance to the enemy position in less than a heartbeat. The first round struck the ledge where the missile operator was positioned, pulverizing granite and human flesh with equal efficiency. The SA-7 missile tube spun end over end through the morning air before clattering down the mountainside, its operator's final squeeze of the trigger sending the missile harmlessly into the valley wall 300 meters away. "Splash 1 MANPADS," Ghost reported with clinical detachment, pulling out of her dive at 600 feet. "Ground element, all hostile positions neutralized. How's your ammunition situation?" Kaz emerged from behind the boulder cluster, scanning the ridgelines with his rifle raised. The sudden silence was almost more unsettling than the gunfire had been, where 30-plus enemy fighters had been coordinating their attack just minutes before. Now only smoke and settling dust remained. The Taliban force that had seemed so overwhelming in the pre-dawn darkness had been systematically eliminated by a single pilot and her flying tank. "Reaper, I'm showing green on ammunition, but hurting pretty bad from this shoulder wound. Can you provide overwatch while I move to the extraction point?" "Absolutely. What's your blood loss situation?" Kaz looked down at his uniform, noting the steady seepage of crimson through his combat shirt. The shrapnel had done more damage than he'd initially realized, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. "I'd say I've got maybe 30 minutes before this becomes a serious problem." "Roger that, cavalry's en route. Stay strong down there." Ghost climbed back to her patrol altitude, but she didn't leave the area. Standard procedure would have been to return to base once the immediate threat was neutralized, but something about the lone warrior's voice had reached her in a way that transcended military protocol. 27 minutes later, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades echoed through the valley as 2 A-60 Black Hawks appeared over the eastern ridge. Ghost had remained on station, circling the area like a mechanical guardian angel while monitoring multiple radio frequencies for any sign of additional threats. Her fuel gauge showed she was running dangerously low, but she wouldn't leave until Kaz was safely aboard the extraction helicopter. "Dustoff 27, this is Reaper 11. Landing zone is cold, no hostile activity observed. Wounded personnel is at the boulder cluster, marked with IR strobe." Reaper 11 Dust Off 27, thanks for keeping our boy safe. We'll take it from here. Ghost watched through her optics as the lead Black Hawk settled into the valley, its downwash creating a small sandstorm that obscured the loading process. She could see figures moving around the helicopter, medics rushing toward Kaz's position with a stretcher, door gunners maintaining overwatch, the pilot keeping his engines spooled up for immediate departure. Within 5 minutes, the helicopters were airborne again, climbing rapidly toward the safety of higher altitude with their precious cargo secured. Ghost waited until they cleared the mountain peaks before turning her aircraft toward home, the A-10's fuel warning lights now flashing insistently on her instrument panel. Reaper 11, this is ground element, came Kaz's voice over the radio, weaker now but still clear. I don't know who you are, but I owe you my life. Ghost keyed her microphone, suddenly aware that this moment would stay with both of them forever. Just doing my job, warrior. Heal up fast. We might need you again. Count on it, Reaper. What's your name? Ghost hesitated for a moment, thinking about operational security and call sign protocols. Then she realized none of that mattered. Ghost, Captain Evelyn Kozlov, remember it. Ghost, Kaz repeated as if testing the weight of the name. I'll remember, we all will. The radio fell silent as the Black Hawks disappeared into the haze over the Pakistani border, carrying with them a story that would spread through the special operations community like wildfire. But Ghost didn't know about any of that yet. She was focused on flying her damaged bird home, unaware that she had just become a legend. Ghost Kozlov had learned to fly in another life, before the military took her rough edges and honed them into precision instruments of war. Her father had been a crop duster in Kansas, working the endless wheat fields that stretched from horizon to horizon like a golden ocean. She'd spent summers in the cockpit of his ancient Cessna, learning to read the wind, and whether the way other children learn to read books. When she turned 18, everyone expected her to follow her mother's path into teaching or her sister's into traditional marriages with local farmers. Instead, Ghost walked into the Air Force recruiting station in Dodge City and asked how she could fly fighters. The recruiter, a weather-beaten sergeant with 20 years of enlisted time, had looked her up and down and suggested she consider a career in logistics or communications. That was his first mistake. Ghost scored perfect marks on every aptitude test they gave her, from spatial reasoning to stress tolerance. She mastered the flight simulators so thoroughly that her instructors began using her scores as benchmarks for other candidates. At pilot training school, she flew T-6 Texan II trainers with the same intuitive grace that had once guided her through Kansas thunderstorms in her father's crop duster. The real test came when she transitioned to the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft was a relic from the Cold War, designed to kill Soviet tanks on European battlefields that no longer existed. Most pilots saw it as a dead-end assignment, a flying truck that lacked the glamour of F-16s or F-22s. But Ghost fell in love with the Warthog the moment she strapped into its titanium cockpit. The A-10 was built around its gun, the way cathedrals were built around their altars. Everything else, the engines, the wings, the landing gear, existed to serve the massive GAU-8 cannon that formed the aircraft's spine. It was ugly, slow, and about as aerodynamic as a flying refrigerator. It was also the most effective close air support platform ever built, capable of loitering over battlefields for hours while delivering precision firepower to troops in contact. Ghost understood that she wasn't just flying an aircraft. She was commanding a weapons system designed to save lives. Every time she strapped in, she carried the hopes and fears of ground forces who depended on her skill and judgment to bring them home alive. It was a responsibility that some pilots found crushing, but Ghost embraced it like a sacred covenant. Her call sign had come from her ability to appear suddenly over battlefields where no air support was supposed to be available, delivering devastating attacks before vanishing back into the sky like a spirit of vengeance. The young pilots at Bagram Airfield whispered stories about her exploits with the kind of reverence usually reserved for combat legends from previous wars. They'd heard about the time she'd saved an entire Marine platoon pinned down in Helmand Province, or how she'd single-handedly broken up a Taliban offensive outside Kandahar by destroying 12 vehicles in a single attack run. What they didn't know was that each of those missions had carved something away from her soul, leaving her both harder and more vulnerable than the confident pilot who'd first arrived in-country. Ghost never talked about the nightmares that came after particularly difficult missions, or the way her hands sometimes shook when she was alone in her quarters. She'd learned to compartmentalize her emotions the way she compartmentalized her weapons systems, everything in its proper place, nothing allowed to interfere with mission effectiveness. But late at night, when the base was quiet and the only sounds were distant generators and the occasional helicopter landing, she sometimes wondered if saving so many lives was slowly killing something inside her. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd found her purpose in an aircraft that everyone else considered a relic. The A-10 was scheduled for retirement, deemed too slow and vulnerable for future conflicts against near-peer adversaries. Defense contractors were pushing newer, more expensive aircraft that could perform multiple roles with computer-aided precision. But none of those sleek, modern fighters could do what Ghost did in her flying tank: provide close, personal, intimate fire support to troops in desperate circumstances. Flying back toward Bagram after the rescue mission, Ghost ran through her post-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Her aircraft had taken minor damage from small arms fire, a few holes in the wings and tail, nothing that would prevent her from landing safely. The GAU-8 cannon had performed flawlessly, expending approximately 300 rounds during the engagement. All systems showed green on her instruments, though her fuel gauge indicated she'd pushed her luck about as far as physics would allow. What Ghost didn't realize was that her radio transmissions had been monitored by intelligence specialists who were always listening for patterns and indicators of tactical significance. The rescue of Master Chief Volkov had taken place in an area where no American forces were supposed to be operating, using assets that weren't officially assigned to that sector. Someone was going to ask questions, and those questions were going to lead to answers that certain people in the Pentagon preferred to keep classified. As she approached the traffic pattern at Bagram, Ghost could see her crew chief waiting on the flight line with his usual collection of tools and spare parts. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez had been maintaining A-10s longer than most pilots had been flying them, and he could diagnose problems from the sound of the engines before the aircraft even landed. Tower, Reaper 11 requesting straighten approach to runway 21. Aircraft is code 2 with minor battle damage. Reaper 11 Tower. Cleared straighten approach runway 21. Emergency vehicles standing by as precautionary measure. Ghost touched down with the smoothness that came from hundreds of combat landings, the A-10's robust landing gear absorbing the impact with mechanical reliability. As she taxied toward her parking spot, she could see Rodriguez already walking around the aircraft, his trained eyes cataloging the damage from small arms fire. To him, bullet holes were just another maintenance item, like changing oil or replacing worn brake pads. "How'd she handle, Captain?" Rodriguez asked as Ghost shut down the engines and began her post-flight inspection. "Like a dream, Sergeant. Took a few hits but nothing that compromised flight safety. The gun ran perfect, 300 rounds expended, all systems nominal." Rodriguez nodded with satisfaction. He took personal pride in maintaining aircraft that could save American lives, and every successful mission validated his meticulous attention to detail. "I'll have her patched up and ready for the next sortie by tomorrow morning. Any specific squawks I should know about?" "Negative. She brought me home safe just like always." What Ghost didn't mention was the conversation she'd overheard on the command frequency during her flight back to base. Intelligence officers were already asking questions about her unauthorized deviation from assigned patrol sectors, and the operations officer wanted to see her for debriefing as soon as she landed. In the military, success could sometimes be as problematic as failure, especially when that success occurred outside officially sanctioned parameters. As she walked across the tarmac toward the squadron building, Ghost could feel the weight of the morning's events settling onto her shoulders like a familiar burden. She'd saved a life today, probably prevented a diplomatic incident if Kaz had been captured or killed in that valley. But she'd also revealed capabilities and positioning that certain people preferred to keep classified, and that was going to create complications she couldn't yet anticipate. The debriefing would be thorough and probably unpleasant. Intelligence officers would want to know how she detected the emergency beacon, why she deviated from her assigned patrol route, and what assets had been deployed to provide extraction for the rescued SEAL. Some of those questions had answers she was authorized to give. Others touched on operational details that existed in classified compartments far above her security clearance level. What Ghost couldn't know was that her rescue of Master Chief Volkov had been observed by more than just American intelligence assets. Enemy signals intelligence operators had also been monitoring the frequencies, plotting aircraft movements, and drawing conclusions about American capabilities and intentions in the region.